It's a great evening, family. Welcome. Come on in. I'm going to be talking about tonight. I found some articles on the Afro Germans and their situation during the Holocaust. And to my surprise, behind the scenes, our dear sister, she was doing some work in this area. So we're going to read through this article. It's called Hitler's Forgotten Victims. And it says here, even though we know that it was over 10,000 Afro Germans that were murdered in the Holocaust during World War II. On Holocaust Memorial Day, let's remember that at least 10,000 people of African descent were murdered by the Nazis. This is one of them right here in this picture. Okay. Black survivors of the Nazi Holocaust are demanding the real story of Hitler's Germany is told. Their story is largely untold, their battle for compensation mostly fruitless. Thousands of African descent perished in Nazis' concentration camps. Many survivors have since died of old age, their place in history forgotten. This report spoke exclusively to two Afro Germans, both in their 80s, who revealed their extraordinary stories of living under an ever present fear of death. One was imprisoned in a Nazi death camp, the other became a member of Hitler Youth who wore a swastika on his sweater until his mother snipped it off. They both suffered at the hands of terrifying fascist regime. I feared for my life every day, said Theodore Michael, who has fought for recognition of Hitler's Black victims. The emotional scars of this imprisonment remain. Even today, he said mournfully, remembering his friends and neighbors who perished. Now living in Cologne, he says luck played a part in his survival, but it is clear he perfected the art of avoiding authorities. Hitler slaughtered between 10,000 and 25,000 Black people, a fraction of the number of Jews killed, but undoubtedly an important part of the history. Black Germans were subjected to medical experiments, mass sterilization, drives, and thrown in concentration camps. In 1930s, Germany Blacks faced a daily struggle to stay alive. One of them even joined the Hitler Youth ranks. Hans Jürgen Mascaro, the son of top Liberian diplomat, was raised in Hamburg, miles from other Afro-Germans in the Rhineland region near Berlin. He said he just wanted to fit in. There was a tremendous pressure to join the Hitler Jugend. All my classmates joined the Hitler Youth movement. I wanted to be part of everything, but I did not know what I became a part of. As the only kid with brown skin, I had no place to hide. The Jews had Star of David on their clothes, but my very appearance singled me out. From the moment the Nazis came to power, they categorized Aryans and non-Aryans. Although we once were the true Aryans. And like I said, Hitler took all this science from ancient Egypt. And because we know that Aryan is definitely African. So he took all this education and science knowledge and they took on the identity, the swastika, all the signs that we had, all everything back in our ancient times. because we know there was no white people past 6,000 years ago. 6,000 years now. A little bit over 6,000. I soon found out I was non-Aryan. Grandson of the Liberian consul, to his contrary, he is one of the original Aryans. Being that he was, born, that his bloodline comes from Africa directly, and that's an African identity. Grandson of the Liberian consul general to Hamburg, Muscowie, knew his color prevented him attending high school. You see, but it goes deeper. It goes really deep. That's where the superior race comes from. That's where I did a video yesterday on a white supremacist who was talking about Egypt. And it was a lot of conceptualized art in there, because their dream has always been to take Africa and make it this big city, be able to make, they just envisioned to have big, tall buildings, because we don't do Twin Towers, because that's not, we didn't come from a mountainous place and the cave places and places like that. They come from those mountainous places. It's kind of weird, but when you look at the movie King Kong, that's the symbolism you get. Their relation to King Kong through the habitat. King Kong didn't come from now where we call Africa, that continent part. He was in Asia, where they were from, the Caucasians. So if you watch the 1976 King Kong, you would get symbolism. So like I said, they took a lot of our knowledge from our ancients. And like I said, they like to make a big theater, which makes like live on purpose. And so they take this knowledge and they utilize it for what way they want to utilize it. But for us, it's backwards, because the way they use it ends up being not for good things, but for bad things. So both Malco and Muscowie learned to keep a low profile. To come to the authorities' attention spelled almost certain death. Michael said, "I didn't cross the street through a red light. If you get into the middle of the system, you die. I did nothing to get attention, in no way, either positive or negative." With his grandfather, a chief from Cameroon, Michael tried to flee from Germany. But like thousands of others, his roots in Germany, former African colonies, closed off all escape routes. Britain and France's decision to deny refugees. See, this, I hate to tell you, family, but the United States, Britain, France, these were the game players in this whole thing. That's why the United States is paying money, our tax money. But it's always been a plan to do that. It's always been a plan, because they all wanted the state of Palestine to be the state of Israel. And when you look at the word Israel, it goes back to the ancient times as well. It's Isis, Ra, and El. And like I said, they get all this ancient knowledge and they utilize it for their benefit because they know that it's truth in all that stuff and what's going to happen and what's happening. That's why we get so much hate. That's why we have so much hate, because they then deciphered the truth behind all that science. And they refuse to face the truth of it. So they make their own reality and include us in it, thinking that they can change things. Nothing's going to change. So we see that the heavy players, Britain, France, United States, they didn't put the United States in here, but believe me, I've already studied where United States did play a hand in it. And I kind of figured that they probably didn't send soldiers in until all the cleanup was done with the murders of the Afro Germans. Mm-hmm. So the decision to deny refuge to Afro Germans on the grounds that they or their family descended from a country once ruled by Germany is an outrage, Michael said. All those people who had passports of another country left Germany, but we couldn't leave because there was no country to take us. We were stateless. The United Kingdom closed off opportunities for Africans from former German colonies to escape. You see, I also believe, like they said, they were from these colonies that were controlled by Germany. So no one wanted us. It was a trap. I'm going to repeat that. It was a trap. Yes, we were trapped in Germany. It cost a lot of lives. As the war turned against Hitler and final solutions began with mass concentration camps, Afro-Germans were stripped of their papers, sealing the fate of thousands. Michael endured years of forced hard labor, working around the clock at a munitions factory before being liberated by the Russians as the war ended. So the Russians came in and liberated him. He is grateful he was not confined a more notorious concentration camp like Auschwitz, and was still alive when set free after Germany's defeat in 1945. Today, ironically, the absence of material proof that Black people suffered under the Nazis has made the fight for restitution harder. Well, when it comes to us, we should never expect restitution from those who don't even want our existence to be. They're just not going to do that. They don't have love for us like our people think they do. They don't have nothing for us. And if they could do this again, they're going to keep trying to use their little sneaky, underhanded tricks to find a way to genocide us and only us. Michael said, if you came as a Jew, that was clear. As a German Black person, it was not so easy that they understood the situation. Mostly, they didn't even know that people of color were persecuted. While billions of dollars have been paid to Jewish victims, that's Caucasians, that's those 92% in America who identify as white, but still get benefits, but still got a country and had the audacity to call it Israel, ISIS, Ra, and El. The majority of Black victims' families have received nothing. A high level of skepticism about their persecution is made. Of course, it's going to be a high level of skepticism. They don't think nothing of us. Nothing. Nothing. That's why we're still in slavery today. It's made worse by virtual absence of their story from books on Nazi era and Holocaust museums around the world. African American historian Professor Clarence Lusane, who authored Hitler's Black Victims, commented a lot of people who should qualify for compensations are in their 90s and are now just passing away. It seems unlikely that there's going to be a big turnaround. There's little knowledge about what happened to the Afro-Germans outside of Germany. They definitely didn't get to make that trip to their newfound land. I can tell you that much, because that's all white people. And then when these Ethiopians and these other Africans go over, because they got the bloodline, because they were the originators of they were actually, bloodlined in with the people who originated the science of the religion. So when they go over, they suffer so much atrocities. That's why I say stay off these people's stage. You don't want to join them in anything. Look at Black Americans. We decided to integrate, and it's been the worst thing that we could ever imagine. But yet, people want to go join them in a pretend fantasy place called Israel. And only to find they get sterilized, abused, damn near murdered over there. Black student. To have this big camp and you controlled. No different than anywhere else around this world. But a little bit worse. This big gap in history is unacceptable. We have to correct the historic records so the next generation will get a broader version of what happened. Exactly, of the truth. It should be seen as an important part of a history. We can't deal with things today unless we know what happened in the past. Yes, I always say this. You must know what happened behind you so you can ensure moving forward, you're not tricked, you're not trapped, and that you are aware of conscious of everything that's going on. So you can nip it in the butt before it even gets started. That's power. Knowledge. To have this big gap in history is unacceptable. We have to correct the historical records so the next generation will get a broader version of what happened. It should be seen as an important part of history. We can't deal with things today unless we know what happened in the past. A recent survey by Holocaust Memorial Day Trust underlined the level of ignorance about mass murder under the Nazis. Moskowy left Germany in 1948 and immigrated into the United States, where he became a journalist, rising to managing editor of Ebony magazine before his retirement in 1997. He went on to live in Florida. He was forced to escape his New Orleans house last year when struck Hurricane Katrina. Hollywood star Whoopi Goldberg. Now listen to this. Hollywood star Whoopi Goldberg was bowled over by Moskowy's biography, destined to witness and brought film rights to the book. But the ghost actress struggled unsuccessfully for 7 years to find Tinseltown backers and has vented for her frustration at Hollywood and executives who said the story lacks a hook. Last year, it was made into a German TV movie called Neger, Schornsteigerfigur, a painful German insult which translates as Negro, chimney sweep. Hitler's desire to get back the African colonies Germany lost at Versailles Treaty as part of the World War I settlement saw the Nazis make a series of propaganda films showing Germans as the best rulers. Let me tell you, propaganda is the thing that these Europeans love to use. They used it over here in the United States. The time they were claiming they were killing the Indians and doing this and doing all that. That when they came over to America, they used propaganda. Propaganda is the number one tool used. Propaganda, matter of fact, is tomorrow when I do my video, is why we're cultivated. Michael found employment as an actor in these movies, which may have helped him avoid death. Despite German racism towards Black people, they had a taste for Black performing artists. So the ability to sing, yeah, I remember there's one singer. She went over and was during all this time when all this stuff was going on, and she was just anxious. She was just glad that she made it back out of all this mess in World War II. They had a taste for Black performing artists. Ain't this like in the United States of America? So the ability to sing or dance gave the better chance of survival. Jazz played by African Americans was a favorite in the Nazi jazz band in 1940, only drove the music underground. There is even evidence of Black jazz bands entertaining concentration camp guards who liked to unwind after a day of brutality and murder. Several African American musicians who made their living in Germany were apprehended by the Nazi authorities, like Valeda Snow, who was held at the Westerfagel concentration camp. Some, like trumpeter Arthur Briggs, were forced to entertain guards before being sent back to St. Denis internment camp. Holocaust survivor Theodore Michael, right here. John Williams, a survivor from Cote d'Ivoire, was a singer who also performed in Nazi camps, but also suffered terrible beatings by guards. The battle for recognition of Hitler's Black victims has been going on for many years, yet their stories receive little attention. The question today is whether the last living Black German will see international awareness rise while they are still alive. Germany was running a death camps long before Adolf Hitler and Nazis came to power. Their brutal suppression of hero people of Namibia at the turn of the century in many ways appeared like a dress rehearsal for what followed in Europe decades later. After this, in this other article, I'll talk about the other atrocity that happened to Black people once again. Germans put down a rebellion in the East African colony with such ferocity that they came close to exterminating a whole tribe. The slaughter of the hero between 1904 and 1907 was overseen by Army Lieutenant Lothar von Trotha, who ordered that every hero, whether armed or unarmed, with or without cattle, would be shot. In 3 short years, around 60,000 Herero were killed, leaving just 15,000 alive. Officially, the German concentration camps in Namibia had a mortality rate of 45%. Many camps also saw medical equipment experiments. Another forerunner to 1930s Germany, when the Nazis snatched Black families at night, taking them to hospitals for experiments in an attempt to prove their theories of racial superiority. Now, let me tell you, this is not the first time. It won't be the last that these psychotics do this. I brought to you a video of an elder talking about DNA testing. Well, they did this DNA testing, and what they were hoping is that we would be closer to monkeys and chimpanzees and Godzillas and apes. But unfortunately for their luck, they found that they had the closest DNA. So there was nothing to put out. They wanted to keep it hush hush and secret. But I'm telling you, they all are in it together. If you don't believe it, they all are in it together on this superior race thing. And it's all because it goes back to ancient, like I told you, I did that video with that white supremacist talking about ancient Egypt, but it was never Egypt. They call it Egypt because that's their hate, is to want to keep people in bondage. And that's what they vowed to do. That's why today it's called Egypt, because they were able to take us and put us in bondage. So now that's a constant reminder for them, for their egos. Okay, Eugene Fisher, the father of eugenics, carried out extensive work in Southwest African colonies during the period, including Namibia. 2 decades later, the case of the so-called Rhineland bastards shows that hostility towards Black people was rising in Germany before Hitler came to power. And that's obvious because we've always suffered atrocities of hate from their hate, regardless whether there was a Hitler or not. And Hitler was a puppet. I would say Hitler was a puppet of the United States, France, of all these places. The big bankers, they put him in. They put him in. After Germany lost the First World War, the Allies stationed hundreds of African troops in the defeated nation, many of them from French colonies. German resentment against occupation took the form of a campaign of hate against these Black troops. Yes, our like I said, my grandfather served in World War II. And the treatment that these men received during that time and actually having to serve was just an atrocity, was just horrifying. And then when they came back home, no benefits. It's just, and then having to deal with segregation, you know. These, okay. Hundreds or so mixed race children they fathered. Objective historical sources shows that the working class German women were often the ones to make sexual advances. Yet the German media whipped up a popular frenzy with tales about rape. Despite hardly any evidence of sexual aggressions by Black troops, the controversy that took place in the pre-Nazi Weimar era led to mass sterilization drives. Germany sterilized most of the Rhineland bastard children. This article has first published. See, this is our elders at the time not being aware of the kind of world they're in, and they giving their seeds off to monsters. That's what they did. They gave their seeds over to monsters, their children. And that in itself is an atrocity. Just knocked me off. But I'm going to take some time out and thank some people for being here. Thank you, Fex on me. Thank you, Emmanuel Briggs. Patience is a virtue. The Forecast. Thank you, Forecast, so much. Brother Bakari. Thank you, Brother Bakari, for being here. And all right, let me get back to the article. They knocked me off. Well, my computer does this every once in a while, but I don't put it past them to not be trying to knock me off. Let me get back to this. Get back to this article. Okay, we was talking about how then they should have been very aware of the world around them, but I don't know. We can't say what they were thinking, feeling, but I know I just couldn't see letting my children be if I was in that shoes. in a I just couldn't see doing that at all, because these people have never treated you with kindness. You're dealing with a psychopath. And that's an awareness that our people didn't have then. So that's just awful to have to hear that many of our Black soldiers, or many Black Germans, interracially mixed and had children, that these people labeled Rhineland bastards, and they were able to experiment on these children and sterilize them. Man, that's what I always talk about. Awareness of the world around us is very critical, to know that there's people out here want to devour you, and your children are like voodoo dolls of you, and they will never ever detach from you. You would forever be attached to them. And it's just an awful thing to think about, the atrocities that many of our people allow themselves to endure on purpose without even thinking. It's important to think. So let's get into the next. Let's get into the next article, family. Okay, here. Hold on. For some reason, I think it was better in Europe. No, it's not better in Europe. I don't know why you get that. It wasn't better anywhere. I don't see how you get. Don't you know what they did? Those were Black royalties. They killed off the Black royalties, took over Europe. That's what they did. So if you think that might be better for you in Europe versus us already been here on our own land, or in Africa, or because Europe was really part of Africa, but they took the land. They were able to take the land. And so I don't see how you, I mean, it wouldn't be no different. Let me just tell you that. It really wouldn't be no different forecast at all. Okay. Let me get that back up. Okay, there we go. Ooh, how do I get it off? Okay, there we go. Let's get back to the next article, and then I'm going to start talking about another place where we had really, really awful atrocities happen way before the Germany thing. Okay. Let me get this situated here. Even today, we got it better than the Black people in England. We got it way better than the Black people in England. My husband grew up in England. It wasn't easy any place around this world, this country. I mean, in England, in Africa, it was rough because of colonization. Blacks get big time discriminated against in England. And, you talking about the heart of where they take your children's blood and drink it. Why would you want to endure that? And England is not, Europe is not as fascinating as they try to. It's, once again, that's propaganda. Okay, the next article is what happened to the Black Germans under Nazis. Okay, that's propaganda. There's so much propaganda. Interracial relationships, where you got a white woman being interviewed, and she blatantly says for materialistic reasons is why she wants to have a kid. She wants to pass on money pass on her legacy to her child. And she's the mother, so the father really does not have control over the lifestyle of the child. So the child's more likely going to be more indulged in whiteness. And the father, with his low self-esteem, is just going to sit in the back and really have no say of anything. And the child's going to end up marrying white. So basically, the father got used for his DNA. The father gets used for his DNA. She wants to pass on her legacy. She knows she's got weak genes. And it's all materialistic reasons. So let's get into this next article. And it says, what happened to Black Germans under Nazis? The fact that we officially commemorate the Holocaust on January the 27th, the date of the liberation of Auschwitz, means that remembrance of Nazi crimes focuses on the systematic mass murder of Europe's Jews. The other victims of Nazi racism, including Europe's Sinti and Roma, are now routinely named in commemoration, but not all survivors have had equal opportunities to have their stories heard. One group of victims who have yet to publicly memorialized is Black Germans. All those voices need to be heard, not only for the sake of the survivors, but because we need to see how varied the expressions of Nazi racism were if we are to understand the lessons of Holocaust for today. When Hitler came to power in 1933, there were understood to have been some thousands of Black people living in Germany. They were never counted in estimates very widely. At the heart of an emerging Black community was a group of men from Germany-owned African colonies, which were lost under the peace treaty that ended World War I. And their German wives, they were networked across Germany and abroad by ties of family and association. And some were active in communist and anti-racist organizations. Among the first acts of Nazi regime was the suppression of Black political activism. There were also 600 to 800 children fathered by French colonial soldiers, many though not all African. When the French army occupied the Rhineland as part of peace treaty settlement after 1919, French troops were withdrawn in 1930, and the Rhineland was demilitarized until Hitler stationed Germans under there in 1936. Denial of rights and work. The 1935 Nuremberg laws, and I think Bakari talked about that the other day, or someone was talking about the Nuremberg laws, stripped Jews of their German citizenship and prohibit them from marrying or having sexual relations with people of German blood. A subsequent ruling confirmed that Black people, like gypsies, so gypsies is short for Egyptian, so gypsies were to be regarded as being of alien blood and subject to the Nuremberg principles. Very few people of African descent and German citizens, even if they were born in Germany, but this became irreversible when they were given passports that designated them as stateless Negroes. In 1941, Black children were officially excluded from public schools, but most of them had suffered racial abuse in their classrooms much earlier. Some were forced out of school, and none were permitted to go on to university or professional training. Published interviews and memorials by both men and women, unpublished testimony, and post-war compensation claims testified to these and other shared experiences. Employment prospects, which were already poor before 1933, got worse. Afterwards, unable to find regular work, some were drafted for forced labor as foreign workers. During the World War II, films and stage shows making propaganda, once again, I told you propaganda is the thing, the tool for the return of Germany's African colonies became one of the few sources of income, especially after Black people were banned from other kinds of public performance in 1939. Incarceration, when SS leader Heinrich Himmler undertook a survey of all Black people in Germany and occupied Europe in 1942, he was probably contemplating a roundup of some kind. But there was no mass internment. Research in camp records and survivor testimony has so far thrown up around 20 Black Germans who spent time in concentration camps and prisons, and at least one who was euthanized victim. Euthanasia victim. The one case we have of a Black person being sent to concentration camp explicitly for being a Michelin, a mulatto, Gert Schramm, interned in Buchenwald, aged 15, comes from 1944. Instead, the process that ended with incarceration usually began with a charge of deviant or antisocial behavior. Being Black made people visible to the police, and it became a reason not to release them once they were in custody. Doesn't this sound like America, family? The police brutalities. And they ramped up in 2013, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. In this respect, we can see Black people as a victim not of a peculiarly Nazi racism, but of an intensified version of the kinds of everyday racism that persist today. Sterilization, an assault on families. It was the Nazi fear of racial pollution that led to the most common trauma suffered by Black Germans. The breakup of families, mixed couples were harassed into separating. When others applied for marriage license, or when a woman was known to be pregnant or had a baby, the Black partner became a target for involuntary sterilization. In a secret action in 1937, some 400 of Rhineland children were forcibly sterilized. Other Black Germans went into hiding or fled the country to escape sterilization. While news of friends and relatives who not escaped intensified the fear that dominated people's lives. The Black German community was new in 1933. In most families, the first generation born in Germany was just coming of age. In that respect, it was similar to the communities in France and Britain that were forming around families founded by men from the colonies. Nazi persecution broke those families and the ties of community. One legacy of that was a long silence about the human face of Germany's colonial history. The possibility that Black and white Germans could share a social and cultural space. That silence helps to explain Germans' mixed responses to today's refugee crisis. The welcome offered by German Chancellor Angela Merkel and many ordinary Germans has given voice to liberal humanitarianism that was always present in German society and was reinforced by the lessons of the Holocaust. I wouldn't trust it. Because look, they're still over there trying to get resources and free resources from Africa and colonizing this place and colonizing that place and getting mad, you know. I wouldn't trust it. The reaction against refugees reveals the other side of the coin. Germans who fear immigration are not alone in Europe, but their anxieties draw on vision that has remained very powerful in German society since 1945. The idea that however deserving they are, people who are not white cannot be German. Exactly. Okay, let's look at this other one, this other story of what did I find that at? Oh, I had images, didn't I? Something Island. Okay, there it was. Severed head of Shark Island prisoner. Okay, we're gonna look at Shark Island. Okay, family, hold on. Let me repeat. See if I have an article. Okay, this article is about a camp in Africa because these people, they did all this because they wanted, am I on the right one? I hope I am. Nope, I'm not on the right one. I gotta get that one on there. Okay, that article right there. Okay, this is the German Kaiser's African death camps, a blueprint of Nazi genocide. It says skin deep microchips paved the way for transhumanism. How Beijing brought off the truest. Military lawyer says genetic changes from vaccine creating new human species by John Henry Weston. Canada dumping ground for former Nazis, says Rodell study. Pope Pius X11 made direct appeal to accept a Nazi collaborator from Czechoslovakia. Yeah. Carl Sidar, New York Times. Long funeral homes, short life insurers. BlackRock fund manager discovers disturbing trends in mortality. Okay, I'm reading. I guess I'm reading on the side. I'm going to stop that. Because a new book reveals how the Kaiser's Germany used concentration camps in Africa to advance their theories of racial supremacy. So they did all this to, they were burning people. They went over Africa, hanging men, burning people, decapitating them. And a new book reveals how the Kaiser's Germany used concentration camps in Africa to advance their theories of racial supremacy. Shark Island, with the picturesque setting, was the site of the world's first death camp. The German invention that accumulated in the Holocaust of World War II, the greatest mass crime of the 20th century. 3,500 innocent Africans were liquidated here at the hands of Germans, decades before the rise of Adolf Hitler. So this was long before we know this. We had King Leopold and his horrible, horrible atrocities he performed on our Congo brothers and sisters. It was just nightmarish. Shark Island is not Namibia's only gruesome secret. 1,000 more bodies are piled in a mass grave under the railway station in the capital of Windhoek, and more still are piled into a burial pit under the National Museum. The story of the German extermination of the Hero and Nama peoples has been expunged from the history books, and I wonder why. And the tourists and the scuba divers on the Shark Bay waterfront will find no mention of it in their guides. But now, new book, The Kaiser's Holocaust by David Lusoga and Casper W. Irish lifts the veil on the horrific and little-known episode of history. More chilling still, the book raises another awful prospect, that the Nazi crimes of World War II were not an aberration, as some have claimed, but emerged from a tradition deeply embedded in the heart of German culture, with its warped beliefs about racial superiority, going back into the 19th century. Hitler hadn't been born when the German flag was raised in 1883 on the coast of Southwest Africa, as Namibia was then known, the first conquest of Germany's African empire. Significantly, The first imperial commissioner was Erich Goring, 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 father of Hermann Goring, later Field Marshal of the Luftwaffe, Luftwaffe, and the most powerful Nazi after the Führer. Hitler hadn't been born. No, he wasn't born when the German flag was raised in 1883 on the coast of Africa. No, I think I'm repeating. Or they're repeating. Okay, they're repeating. This is a repeat. But anyway, until the colonizers had thought Namibia a forbidden place, whose treacherous and fog-bound skeleton coast had deterred all but the most intrepid explorers. But hidden from the gaze of the Europeans was a land of enormous beauty, a realm of tall grasses, hot springs, and water holes, where an array of tribes prospered by tending their long-horned cattle and hunting the herds of springbok and wild beasts that roamed the land. Contrary to the German belief that the indigenous Hero or Nema people were not savages, the Hero had a sophisticated culture, having occupied their ancient lands for centuries. Now, these were ancient people who have never dealt with Europeans. So these people, these Germans came along and wanted to prove themselves to be superior. Ain't that the typical thing we endure as Black people in this life amongst them? The mixed race offspring of early Dutch settlers were furious warriors as well as Christians. Both were more than a match for Goring. And so actually they did have some other settlers come along. An overweight provincial judge with a fondness for dressing up in military uniforms who fled the colony, his nerves shattered by their relentless insurrections. However, Goring had already planted the seeds of experiment that would ultimately lead to their genocide. German Southwest Africa was to become a test bed for Lebensraum, the twisted policy of expansion that was to form the heart of Hitler's ideology. The ideas were developed in the 1870s by writer Friedrich Ratzel, who distorted Darwin's theory of evolution to argue that migration was essential for the long-term survival of a race. To stop migrating, so the theory was to stop advancing the risk being overtaken by other races better fitted for survival. So that's their whole problem. This is what they studied, and this is what they knew facts. They knew these facts about us and about our bodies, but they could not accept it. So they had to find a way to prove themselves to be more superior. And the way they see themselves as superior is by going out and causing death, destruction, and atrocities. And that makes them superior somehow. What better solution for the Germans living in the crowded cities of the Rhineland than to create a new Germany on African soil? And it was easy to justify the elimination of the local Africans because they were an inferior race. However, the hero and the Nama did not prove quite as inferior as German occupiers thought. For years, they stubbornly resisted being driven off their lands into the desert to die. Despite huge loss of life at the hands of the Shroop colonial army and their cleansing patrols. But by 1905, the survivors were weary and weakened. The final straw came when the Kaiser issued an imperial decree expropriating the African lands. Most of the Africans surrendered and were rounded up into concentration camps to build the colony's new railways, grueling work, where men were routinely beaten and women workers systematically raped. Ain't that typical? On one section of the line, 2/3 of the prisoners died in 18 months. But a sinister new idea was forming in the evil minds of the governors of German Southwest Africa. An anthropologist was commissioned to investigate the prisoners, who reported that it was of vital importance for the success of the German colonial project that those races deemed unfit for labor should be allowed to disappear. The struggle for our own existence depends on it, he warned. And so the first Holocaust was born, Shark Island, a bleak, rocky inlet in the harbor outside Luderist, would become the world's first death camp and the most feared place on earth for all Black peoples of West Africa. It inspired such terror that on being told he was to be sent there, one hero prisoner fell to the ground, bleeding profusely, having drilled his fingers into his neck in a desperate attempt to commit suicide. Even by standards of brutality administered by the Germans up to now, what happened inside Shark Island was appalling beyond belief. A missionary who was one of the first to enter camp was shocked by what he saw. A woman who was so weak from illness that she could not stand crawled to some of the other prisoners to beg for water. The overseer fired 5 shots at her. 2 shots hit her, one in the thigh, the other smashing her forearm. Another observer tells the abused prisoners forced to carry heavy loads from boats on the shore. On one occasion, I saw a woman carrying a child of under a year old slung on her back and with a heavy sack of grain on her head. The sand was very steep and the sun was baking. She fell down on her face and the heavy sack fell partly across her and partly across the baby. A corporal hit her with a leather whip for more than 4 minutes and whipped the baby as well. The most important witness to the atrocities of Shark Island was the newly invented Kodak roll film camera, which was used by wealthier German officers to take home mementos. You know, they always got to see what atrocities they do to you And then they have to film it, take pictures of it. We know that here in America. They did that to many of our businessmen. They set them on fire, hung them. Jealousy of our economics. Trying to put fear within our people. Of their time there, one surviving snap shows a boy aged 5, his stomach bloated from malnutrition, his only clothing a torn sleeveless vest, and another, an officer poses among the prisoners. You see, these people were living fine until the Germans came over in their island and started committing all these atrocities. They were at peace. They were fine. Wearing his military tunic, he stands rigid and posed, walking cane in hand. A group of ragged and frightened African women at his feet. Many of these photographs of prisoners being mistreated and humiliated were turned into postcards to send back home. See, I just can't. It's just often captioned with sardonic comments. The rape and sexual exploitation of women was not just commonplace, but celebrated. And many semi-pornographic images were made into postcards as well. Unsurprisingly, the inmates started to die in large numbers. Food was so scarce that, according to the witness, when rations were distributed, prisoners fought like wild animals and killed each other to secure a share. Others scavenged. And this is the same psychology they play on us in our cities. It may not be a reality to realize, something that you can come to realization with, but it's the truth. It's that control mechanism of your economics, and this is what happens. This is what happens. This is in a small place tester, and we're actually seeing that they know that people will kill each other to get what they need to thrive. And it's an awful thing for somebody to intentionally do this. I wouldn't even say someone. This is monsters. This is monsters. Those who were not left to die were worked to death, being compelled to carry large stones across the island and drag them into the freezing waters of the bay. They were forced to stand knee-high in the icy sea until they had to be pulled out and their limbs massaged back to life. After 2 years, the camp was forced to close. 70% of the inhabitants were dead. And of those still alive, a third were so sick the camp commander believed they were likely to die in the near future. But this wasn't before the prisoners had become a resource exploited in the name of medical and racial science in terrible anticipation of atrocities of the Third Reich. In one of the local concentration camps, at a place called Swakopmund, women were forced to boil the severed heads of their own people and scrape the flesh, sinews, and ligaments off the skull with shards of broken glass. The victims may have been people they had known or even relatives. The skulls were packed into crates and sent off to museums and universities in Germany. Most notorious of all the Shark Island camp physicians, Dr. Bofinger, he carefully decapitated the bodies of 17 prisoners, including a 1-year-old girl. After breaking open the skulls, he removed and weighted the brains before placing each head in preserving alcohol and sealing them in tins for export to the University of Berlin. Now, do you think Europe would be a nice place to live amongst monsters? Amongst monsters. Do you think Europe would be a great place to live amongst monsters? I don't think so. I barely want to live amongst the monsters I live amongst. And I'm telling you, I am telling you, I'm telling you. So with that said, family, thank you guys. Thank you, Elite Media. It's a lot. And, I wouldn't want to be them. I wouldn't want to trade any place with them. I'm Black, proud to be the way I am, because I know there's more to me. And, I feel this heavy sense of purpose. A purpose. And I don't have to go out and see if these other races are inferior than me. I don't have to do that. They do that for us. We don't have to do that. They do the work. And they show their truth. So with that said, family, true love, real peace, the higher self within the soul. Always remember, and peace. And make chaos run upon the land and take out the wicked. Peace.